So we had three breakout questions on the table. The first of which being, what is the thesis of Glissant's text? So what are the main points? What are the main arguments of the reading? Second being, what is the what is the open boat a metaphor symbolizing, or what is the open boat a metaphor for? And then finally, what are the three phases or the three metamorphoses of the abyss? Who would like to start us off with the opening question? What is the thesis of the text?
I can go.
Okay.
It's the kind of like the main like topic is about deportation of Africans who are living through the experience of the deportation to America, which is the slave trade, correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. Anyone else want to add to Kevin's analysis? Anyone else have something different or want to further add to the thesis of the text? If not, we go into number two. What is the open boat symbolizing, or what is it a metaphor for? Okay, go ahead, Eric.
I would say like the open boat is a metaphor for like a boat that starts off with like an enslavement boat that starts off with no people who are enslaved, and then as like the boat becomes like full with those enslaved, and it becomes like a boat that's full, I guess.
Yes.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. And who else? What are the three metamorphoses of the abyss? I think Eric gave us a spot on depiction of what the open boat symbolizes, but what are the three metamorphoses of the abyss? Go ahead, Kevin.
So there's three, and then there's the womb abyss, where they reference the boat as a womb to where it's like a life sentence to death.
Mm-hmm.
They also another abyss metaphor for abyss is the depths of sea. How deep is the water? It's getting weighed down. Is it getting like weighed up? And then there's the I can't pronounce that word. Is it tautology?
Mm-hmm. Tautology.
Yeah, tautology. It's the entire ocean. So the entire like ocean like gently swaying from like one side to the other, and not ocean. Yeah, the ocean swaying, but the boat is like moving from one side to the other as
Perfect.
it's like crossing.
Yes, yes, yes. Anyone else want to add to Kevin's analysis of the abyss? I think you're spot on. There's a little other component to that third abyss that, if not, I'll go into greater detail in my lecture. But if no one has any further questions or comments or want to chime in, we'll move into my lecture. All right. So for today's lecture, actually for today and Wednesday, we're dealing. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Kevin.
I skimmed over it. It's like one vast beginning, but the beginning is like marked by those balls and chains that are gone green.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So this is the text. It's called The Poetics of Relations. The author is Edward Glissant. He is a Martinican poet, philosopher, scholar, and author. This is originally written in French, excuse me, but it was translated to English by Betsy Wang. So looking at the opening page, right? He argues, looking at the first first full paragraph, it states that the first dark shadow was cast by being wrenched from their everyday familiar land, away from protecting gods and tulare community. But that is nothing yet. Exile can be born, even when it comes as a bolt from the blue. The second dark of night fell as tortures and the deterioration of persons, the result of so many incurable guinas, which are like great travesties or horrific occurrences. That's what a guina is. Imagine 200 human beings crammed into a space barely capable of containing a third of them. Imagine vomit, naked flesh, swarming lice, the dead slumped, the dying crouched. Imagine, if you can, the swirling red of mounting to the deck, the ramp they climb, the black sun on the horizon, vertigo. Now, on the top, very top page, right, the very top of the page, excuse me, it says, for the Americans who lived through the experience of for the Africans who lived through the experience of deportation to the Americas. And you see that little asterisk, right, after the Americas. If you follow that asterisk to the bottom of the page, right, it says that the slave trade came through the cramped doorway of the slave ship, leaving a wake like that of a crawling desert caravan. It may be drawn like this. You see like a line with like these two things on each end, right? It says African countries to the east and the land of the Americas to the west. This creature in the image of Fabril. On the second paragraph, this is what becomes important. Okay, it says that African languages became deterritorialized, right? So they become out of their territory. They begin to get moved around, right? Thus contributing to the creolization of the West. This is the most completely known confrontation between the powers of the written word and the impulses of orality, right? The only written thing on the enslavement ship was the account book listing the exchange values of the enslaved. Within the ship's space, the cry of those deported was stifled, as it would be in the realm of the plantations. This confrontation still reverberates to this day. Now let's break that down, because it's a very fecund passage. And when I say fecund, means like rich, deep with meaning, right? African language get deterritorialized, right? And this is produces like what he calls this creolization. Is anyone familiar with the term Creole? Yes. Eric, can you speak to us kind of what Creole is and what that means, so that way I could kind of unpack that a little bit more?
Yeah, so for me, well, my grandfather on my mother's side is from Louisiana, and so he is Creole. Well, I mean, it's certain areas that are populated with Creole people, but I know it's like a mixture of different ethnicities. So like I think I believe American Indian, um and it's like two other ones that I can't remember, African American and another one. But they're often a lot different in like appearance. So like some of them may be lighter skin or have red hair. And so I think that also comes from like the European like mix. Some it's I yeah.
Yeah, no, you're spot on, right? And typically it's like a French mixture, it's a African mixture, right? And then it's like like he mentioned, this Native American type of mixture. But think about this, right? Think about the enslavement enterprise. So we know that they predominantly, when we talk about the transatlantic enslavement enterprise, we know they predominantly kidnap folks from West Africa, right? So think about this. We have Nigerians who speak Hausa. We have Nigerians that speak Yoruba, right? We have Ghanaians that speak Akan. We have Ghanaians that speak Twi, right? All of these various different languages, right? They get put together in the bottom of this ship. Now, one thing we know about human beings, when they're placed in horrific circumstances, that nature and that desire to survive supersedes anything, right? So if we are to think about this, we have to assume that when these people are chained together, and although they don't speak the same language, right, they're trying to figure out what the fuck is going on. So between their attempts to figure out what's going on, they'll develop a certain type of language that allows them to communicate with each other, right? So if I speak Twi and Jay speaks Hausa, we're going to find a commonality between our language, right? Maybe the word chain in my language and the word chain in Jay's language has the same root word, right? So we'll be able to build on that root word and come to the understanding that, boom, okay, we both in chains, right? So this attempting to communicate with one another produces a new language within itself. Does that make sense? This is that starting of this creolization process, right? And then for those who make the journey to the Americas, for those who are dropped off in the United States, right, the language that is predominant in that land is English, right? So now this African languages that get combined together at the bottom of the enslavement ship is now mixed with the English language, and this produces a whole nother type of language, right? For those who are transported to like Jamaica, well, Jamaica is an English colony. Let's say for those who are transported to Haiti, right? That's a French colony. So that language that was produced by mixing African languages on the bottom of the ship now gets blended with French, right? And this produces this creolization of the language. So this is what Glissant means when he talks about the deterritorialization of languages, right? Because now my Hausa language is now moved not only stuck in Nigeria, it's been transported to the Western Hemisphere. Does that make sense? So this is what he means when he talks about this, like this notion of creolization. The other way to think about creolization is food, right? Creole food. And Eric points us to New Orleans. And if anybody's been to New Orleans, you know, like it has some of the best food on the planet, right? A really infamous Creole dish is gumbo. Anybody familiar with the gumbo, or the dish, or heard of gumbo?
I am. I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
Yep.
Okay, so Lena, do you know how gumbo is made?
Sort of. So I know it's like a soup and like some type of soup and stew, but I do know that it tastes really good because back in high school, my friend used to bring some and we all used to have some.
Yeah, it's fucking delicious. You're absolutely right about that, right? So, but how the process is made, right? The first thing that you do is you want to have your roux, right? Which is like vegetable. I'm a vegetarian, so I always think vegetable broth, right? But it could be chicken broth, it could be beef, whatever the broth is. Then you put your seasoning in there. You put your onions in there. You put your garlic in there. You let that simmer, right? And then the roux has its own flavor to itself, right? Predominantly gumbo's made with rice. So once the roux has been simmering and that flavor starts to infuse within the roux, the rice is poured in. Then you start to add your meats. For those who eat sausages, will be the sausages. Then you start to add your shrimp, your crab legs, and things of that nature. But what's important is that seasoning that sits in that roux gets infused into all of these different meats, rice, and all these different flavors. The combination of things produces this overall flavor, right? And this is why this notion of creolization for Glissant is important, because think about it. This is a poetic, right? So he's working through metaphors, which is why the open boat becomes important, right? So he's using this notion of creolization, this notion of mixing things together to produce something new, to get you to think about this experience that's the transatlantic enslavement enterprise. Does that make sense? And he tells us, right, this is the most completely known confrontation between the written word and orality. Now, orality is the ability to orate, the ability to speak, right? And he tells us the only thing that was written was the ledgers that kept record of the value of those who were enslaved. That's the only thing written on the ship, right? So this is one end of the confrontation. The other is the stifles of orality, right? So let me ask you, what does it mean to stifle something? What does it mean to have something stifled?
To be halted.
Perfect. To be halted, to attempt to stop it, right? So I told you orality is the ability to orate, the ability to speak, right? And he says that within the ship's space, the cry of those deported was stifled, right? So they're letting you know that these people who are being deemed as ledgers, right? Their cry is being muted, it's being halted, it's being stopped. Now let's think about this. This is the first known confrontation. The ledgers, by definition, embody the inhumanity of those Africans who were kidnapped and placed on the bottom of the ship. Does that make sense? Right? Because it's taking you from being a Miri Manzili to the amount that you paid for a Miri Manzili. You understand me? So your humanity at that point has been removed and you've been reduced to the value of your purchase, okay? Think about I don't know, y'all may not have had to go through this, but if you have parents who are into corporal punishment, like whooping and spankings, right? You know that once you get whipped, the natural response is to what? Is to cry out. That's the human thing to do when you experience pain, is to cry out. But what they seek to do is stifle those cries, right? And this is the confrontation that Glissant points us to. Is the confrontation between someone trying to strip the humanity from people and a people trying to maintain their humanity by doing human things. When you get hurt, you cry, right? And he says this confrontation continues onto the plantation, right? So this battle between the desire to render African people inhuman and African people's desire to humanize themselves, that continued on to the plantation. What is terrifying partakes of the abyss, 3 times linked to the unknown. So right there, he lets you know that the abyss is synonymous with what's unknown. The abyss is synonymous with not knowing, right? And he lets us know also that it's 3 times. So there's 3 phases to the abyss. The first, the time you fell into the belly of the boat. 4, in your poetic vision, a boat has no belly. A boat does not swallow up, does not devour. A boat is steered by open skies. Yet, the belly of this boat dissolves you, precipitates you into a non-world from which you cry out. And again, we have the cries, right? Again, you seek to institute your humanity. This boat is a womb abyss. It generates the clamor of your protest. It also produces the coming anonymity. Although you are alone in this suffering, you share in the unknown with others whom you have yet to know. This boat is your womb, a matrix, and yet it expels you. This boat pregnant with as many dead as living under the sentence of death, right? So we know that's the first abyss, the boat itself, right? And it says, although you are alone, right? You're not alone. You share in the unknown with others. And this is what I was pointing you to earlier, right? We're chained together, but you feel alone because you don't know how to communicate with this individual. There's no means of communication, so that isolates you in the experience, right? The next abyss was the depths of the sea. Whenever a fleet of ships gave chase to a slave ship, it was easiest to just lighten the load by throwing cargo overboard, weighing it down with ball and chains. These underwater signposts mark the course between the Gold Coast and the Leeward Islands. Okay, so let's break that down. So Kevin points us earlier to that second abyss, which is the sea, right? The depths of the sea, which is also an unknown, because we know that the abyss is always linked to an unknown, right? But he says in this sea, whenever a fleet of ships gave chase to a slave ship, so this is an important historical conjecture right here, right? There's a time where it was illegal to transport enslaved Africans, right? Europe had, Britain, I believe it was, had made it illegal to engage in this process of the transatlantic slave trade, right? So this is why ships would chase slave ships, is what he's talking about. Because if it's illegal and the Coast Guard sees these ships, they're going to try to make sure you're not doing anything illegal, right? So a chase ensues. Just like anything, if it's heavier, it's not going to be able to move as fast. So what do? You throw the cargo overboard to lighten the load, right? So what are the cargo on these particular ships? What cargo are we speaking of?
Slaves.
The enslaved, correct. Africans who are enslaved. Remember, because we don't refer to African people as slaves. So correct, Nina, thank you. And so what they say is, right, you're weighing them down with ball and chain. I'm sorry, what'd you say, Amanda?
Were they hidden in the boat, the enslaved?
That's why they're in the bottom of the boat.
Okay, so
yeah, they didn't want to
see them.
I'm sorry, say it again?
You couldn't see them. So
You
if
couldn't
other
see,
boats
correct.
were okay.
Correct. And so So what they would do is they would tie ball and chains to them and throw them overboard, right? And so with them being ball and chain, they would what? Sink to the bottom of the ocean, right? And this is why he says, these underwater signposts, again, think about it, they're being dragged to the bottom of the ocean. These underwater signposts, what am I, sorry. These undersignposts mark the course between the Gold Coast. So the Gold Coast is the west coast of Africa, right, to the Leeward Islands in the Western Hemisphere. So what he's trying to symbolize, right? So think about driving on the freeway, right? Think about going on the 10 West, right? And I'm in the IE, so I'm further east than y'all, right? So as we get from going east and west, right, into the campus, you'll pass what, like Fremont, you'll pass Eastern, right? You'll pass Valley. These are the exits that you have on the signs, right? What Glissant is saying, if you were to go underwater on the Atlantic as if it was a freeway, you would see bodies. The dead bodies of the African people who were chained and thrown overboard. They would serve as those exit signs on the freeway to let you know you're navigating from the western part of Africa to the Americas. Right? So again, we have to think in terms of metaphor. We have to think in terms of poetry. This is why this is a poetic. A poetic is a combination of a poem and an essay, right? So this gives you the freedom and the capacity to use metaphors and to use poetry to help get your point across, to use imagery to help get your point across, right? So that's the second abyss. Okay, looking at page 7, the second paragraph, we'll get into the third abyss. Paralleling this mass of water, the third metamorphosis of the abyss thus projects a reverse image of all that had been left behind, not to be regained for generations, except more and more threadbare in the blue savanna of memory or imagination. So think about it like this. Take us back to our freeway, right? You know, in your car, you have that rear view mirror, right? And that if you look in that rear view mirror, you'll see all that has been behind you, right? All that you drove through. Glissant says that's the third abyss, that reverse image of all that has been left behind, right? So if you've been kidnapped from Ghana, in your rear view, you're going to see Ghana, right? That's what has been left behind. That's what you cannot return back to, right? That's that unknown that you desire to go back to, but the circumstances won't allow you to, right? This is what he says, the reverse image of all that had been left behind, not to be regained for generations, right? So myself, Eric, Jay, I can't trace back where my lineage just starts from Africa, right? They have things like Ancestor and Me and these DNA platforms to allow you to get a better idea of where you come from. But because of this open bow experience, I have been detached from that portion of my history, right? In fact, if I were even to trace back my grandparents, there would come a point where that would end, right? Because of those ledgers that Glissant talks about that makes us not human beings anymore, but makes us property for ownership, right? This is what he means by we can't go get that back, right? As best as I try, right? As best as I try to practice African spiritual traditions, as best as I try to practice traditional African spirituality, right? As best as I try to shape my household within the paradigm of Ma'at, I can't go back and get what was lost through this experience of the open boat. It's lost, it's in the abyss. This is the third metamorphosis of the abyss. But within all of this tragedy, what Glissant is focused on is relation. The book is titled Poetics of Relation. What is relation? Someone tell me what relation is.
Like the relationship you have with like your friends, mother, acquaintances, teachers, professors, etc.
Perfect, right? So how we relate to one another is this notion of relation, right? So on page 8, the second paragraph, not just specific knowledge, appetite, suffering, and delight of one particular people. Not only that, but knowledge of the whole, greater from having been at the abyss and free knowledge of relation within the whole. That's not what I wanted. Hold on. Okay, here you go. I'm sorry. So looking at the second to last paragraph on page 8. For though this experience made you original victim, floating towards the sea abyss, an exception, it became something shared and made us. So know the rhetorical move, right? Although this experience, this open boat made you the individual, it also made us the collective, right? So there's a shift that takes place. The descendants, one people among others. Peoples do not live on exception. Relation is not made up of things that are foreign, but of shared knowledge. This experience of the abyss can now be said to be the best element of exchange. So I'm going to read that second part again. Relation is not made up of things that are foreign, but of shared knowledge. This experience of the abyss can now be said to be the best element of exchange. So he's saying this horrific experience within the open boat that produces these three metamorphoses of the abyss, the boat itself, right? The depths of the sea, right? All that you've been stripped from and stolen from, right? It made something new. It made a new people amongst other people. These are the people who we understand to be part of the African diaspora. These are the people who we understand to be Black folks, right? These are the people who you understand to be African people, right? So what Glissant is trying to point us to and make us attentive to, even in horrific circumstances like the open boat, even in horrific circumstances like enslavement, right? Relation is being produced. Togetherness is being formed. A newness is being produced that makes a new people in a new way. And this is what he's calling us to be attentive to, right? This shared knowledge, even though it's horrific shared knowledge, but it makes us anew. And this is the power that Glissant finds in this notion of relation, right? And to me, it's not too far off from what Ptahhotep's up to in the teaching of Ptahhotep, right? Because what the thesis of Ptahhotep is about is producing a society that does not have strife, right? Or in other words, producing a society that what? Can relate to one another, that can get along. So for me, in both of these texts, teachings of Ptahhotep, the Poetics of Relation, it's about producing a togetherness. It's about producing a human unity that is not focused on differences, but it's focused on the things that are similar, right? So for example, it's 13 of us on this Zoom here. Can you hear me now? Yeah, okay. So there's 13 people on the Zoom here, right? We're all from various different parts of California or even the world, right? We all have various different experiences and personal backgrounds, right? But what Glissant is telling us to do, let's focus on the things that make us the same, right? We're all students at Cal State LA. That's a similarity. That's a formed relation, right? We all take classes within the Department of Pan-African Studies. That's a similarity. That's a form of relation, right? We're all in this class in Pan-African Studies, right? That's another form of relation. So what Glissant's project is not about, well, Nina has an Asian background, I have an African background, so we're going to focus on our differences. It's about, well, Nina attended Cal State LA, I attended Cal State LA, so that's a similarity, and we're going to build on that. This is what this idea or this project of relation becomes about, excuse me. All right, so I'll put my lecture on hold. and we'll transition into our fishbowl. You could talk about the lecture, you could talk about the breakout questions, or you could just read from your journal. All that's acceptable. You have 2 fishbowls per semester. You have 1 time to pass. Is there any volunteers to fishbowl? All right, Eric, I think this is your second one, Eric, so you should be done with your fishbowl for the semester. Kyle, we got you, thank you. We'll have 1 more, preferably a woman if possible, just kind of add some gender balance. 1 more volunteer, if not, I'll call on someone.
I guess I can try.
Okay, perfect, thank you, Nina.
So I really like how you mentioned like not too long ago how that well like even though like we have different heritage backgrounds. So I'm from Bangladesh, but my parents they brought my older sister here through through my dad's, I think it was work visa, and I was born later. I mean, we came here legally, but I really relate to the idea that even though, let's say one of my other classmates, they could be like totally American and they could be born here, we still have our culture. Like in Bangladesh, we have a culture where students, I feel like right here we have more opportunities, but over there, since they don't have a lot of opportunities, the education system is way stricter than ours. Like I remember my dad telling me that like if he didn't do his homework, he would get like a spanking and a beating. And he would tell me that like it doesn't matter how fast of a learner you are or slow of a learner you are. Um, those spankings, like it hurts so much that the next day you're gonna show up with your homework. Rather here, I know that teachers or professors, they definitely cannot do that to you.
Yeah,
And I wanted to share that.
thank you, Lena. We have Eric and Kyle. Who's next?
Oh, I can go next. I think just from the reading, I'll just share like a quote that I wrote in my notes that stood out to me. And it was on page 6 where it said this boat pregnant with as many dead as living under a sentence of death. And I think I just really liked how Glissant, like he personified the boat and made it like something into like, you know, pregnant, like a boat can't be pregnant, but in this case it is pregnant and it's full of enslaved people. And I think also like I like how he like, because like pregnancy is something like indicates like bringing in like new life, and like it should be something that's like a happy time or something that's, you know, positive. But in this case it's like not a good pregnancy, like it's in the case where we're like losing the lives of the enslaved people. And so I just really like how he expressed that in a way.
Good call. I'm gonna circle back to Eric after Kyle goes. Kyle, you're next.
All right, so going back on the open boat metaphor, I wanted to talk about what I thought it meant. I believe it was meant to symbolize like an open experience that the African people endured, like regardless of where they came from, they were all forced to be on this boat, forced to live in sorrow and misery from like the horrible living conditions they had. And like they also like have like a shared history, I would like to say. Like they had like a similar memory, and like these experiences like have lasted them for many years to come. And like it's important to remember that.
Yeah. I think that's, you made me think about something, Kyle, in the sense of the importance of memorializing, if you will, this experience, right? And I think about the Jewish community and how they deal with their Holocaust, right? They have the slogan, never forget, right? But very much so when it pertains to how America deals with the African Holocaust, or what we call the Ma'afa, right? Is very much about forgetting, right? This is why Florida is trying to do what they're trying to do on the other side of the country, right? They're trying to erase these horrific experiences from the historical memory of American people, right? And I think you're absolutely right, Kyle, that we can't forget this. Because if we forget this, it opens the possibilities for a return to these type of circumstances, right? And I think we talked about last week how the system of enslavement is still in play to this day through the prison system and the industrial prison complex, right? So even with that being understood, it shows you that we're not too far off from these horrifying experiences, right? For those who are incarcerated right now, they could look back into their rear view and think about things that they will never have access to again, right? Because let's be real, even if you do a 10-year bid, right? If you got to have to take a seat for 10 years, the way that things change when you get back out, if you return to the block, it don't look the same. It's not the same. It don't operate the same. So you're trying to attach yourself to something that has been gone forever, right? So it's vastly important that we continue to keep these things in the front of our mind. But to piggyback on Eric's idea of pregnancy, and I think he's spot on in understanding how Glissant is using this metaphor. But within that, right, let's think about what he's trying to get us to understand and why he would use pregnancy to help us to get there, right? Although it is horrific, right, it births something new that he says is beautiful, which is why the pregnancy metaphor is, for me, is poignant, right? It fits, but it's also sad. But I don't know. I don't think any of y'all have kids. I could be wrong, but I don't think any of y'all have kids. But I have two, right? So I've seen this process take place twice. And what I can also tell you about this process is very painful for the mother giving birth, right? Again, think about how profound that metaphor is. Think about the pain of the enslavement experience for African people, right? It's a great metaphor. We have about 15 minutes left. I would like to hear some other thoughts, other comments, other concerns, or just questions you may have had about the reading and about the work of Glissant. Anybody?
Just curious, how old are your kids?
7 and 9. My daughter is
Aw.
9. My son is 7. Yeah.
Are they at school right now?
Yeah, they are right now. Typically, I
Aw.
try to bring them to class one semester, but with us being Zoom, there's no class to bring them to. So, any other questions about the reading or what we discussed today? All right, Abigail, what you thinking or what are you feeling?
Well, when I was reading, I really loved the way that they described the boat as pregnancy. It just like the whole reading was about like how poetry was really important within it, and I just liked enjoying reading it. It was nice to see because I've never read something like this before.
Yeah, and to Abigail's point, right? Think about how the Poetic closes out. This is why we stay with poetry. And despite our consenting to all that is indisputable, all the indisputable technologies, right? Despite seeing the political leap that must be managed, the horror of hunger and ignorance, torture and massacre to be conquered, the full load of knowledge to be tamed, the weight of every piece of machinery that we shall finally control, and the exhausting flashes we pass from one era to the other, from one forest to city, from one story to computer, yada, 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 right? But this is why we stay with poetry, is the important part, right? It opens up the possibility to deal with something horrific in a beautiful way, right? This is why I chose this text to deal with the experience of enslavement, right? There's a whole bunch of things that we could have read or we could have watched that articulates the open boat, but I don't think we'd be able to have such a high elevated conversation, a high metaphorical conversation. And I think approaching it the way that it's typically approached, right? It doesn't speak to the agency of African people, right? Like, for example, we could have watched Roots or any of these movies, 13 Years a Slave, right? There's several mediums that we can engage to talk about this experience. But I think what Glissant does with the Poetic, it centers the imagination and it centers the possibility of newness, And I don't think any other conversation or discourse I've heard around the enslavement enterprise will do that, right? The way Glissant does. Other thoughts, other questions, other comments, other concerns? Anthony, what you thinking or feeling?
So, well, it's kind of about the reading, but like I saw the book you had was kind of big, and I was wondering like, are we gonna do other chapters on that book?
Yeah, matter of fact, Wednesday's reading is another chapter from this book. Let me get that pulled up for you. Give me 1 second. Good question, Anthony. Yeah, I try not to overwhelm y'all with too much reading. But for Wednesday, yeah, for Wednesday, we're reading Eritrea in Exile. I'll pull that back, pull it up for you. So this is what we'll be reading for Wednesday. This is also, it's another chapter from the same book. If you'll notice, they're really short. They're not really long readings. But as you could tell from today's reading, right, although it's short, it's a lot that can be extracted from the reading, and it's a lot to unpack, you know. So yes, we'll continue with that. If you're into poetry, and things of that nature, I definitely suggest you taking a deeper dive into Glissant. Any other questions, comments, concerns? We got about 10 more minutes. Jay, what you thinking, what you feeling?
So I was wondering about it's on page 8. It was talking about right here. It says, "And the undreamt of sail finally now spread is watered by the white wind of the abyss." So what is like the abyss part like symbolize? Or like is it just a part of the boat that it's like, you know, I got a little confused on that part.
Okay. So one, if you look on page 6, right? The first full paragraph of page 6, he says that what is terrifying partakes of the abyss, 3 times linked to the unknown. So right there, he's telling you that the abyss is the unknown, right? And if you think about, like, by definition, what the abyss is, it's something that you just don't know what it is, right? You're off in the abyss, right? But then he says that there's 3 metamorphoses of this abyss. There's 3 ways that the unknown presents itself to those going through this experience, right? And if you think about it, right, you in West Africa, you in Senegal, you chilling, you going about your business, somebody snatches you up and puts you on this boat. So that's the first unknown. Like, yo, where the fuck am I? Why am I on the bottom of this boat? I don't know what's going on, right? Abyss 1, unknown. Abyss 2 is the water, right? Now, I'm on this boat. We're moving across the ocean. Don't really know where I'm moving to or what I'm about to get into, right? But I know by this time that I spend on this boat, they're not feeding me, right? I'm chained to some people, right? And keep in mind, like, just to be honest, like he says it, right? People are vomiting, people are naked, there's sweat, there's flesh, there's swarming lice, right? The dead are slumped over and crouched, right? So this is what you're experiencing while you're on the bottom of this boat. But you see this ocean. I don't know really what's at the bottom of this ocean, but I'll tell you what, I'd rather take my chances with this ocean than fucking with this boat, right? Because Glissant talks about the enslavers throwing bodies over into the ocean. What he doesn't talk about are the enslaved who chose to jump overboard voluntarily. He doesn't talk about the enslaved who had children who threw their children overboard voluntarily because they did not know or they did not want to experience what was to come, right? So that's the second metamorphosis of the abyss, the water. And then the third is all that you have left behind, all that is in the rear view mirror as you continue across the Atlantic Ocean to the Americas, right? That you can never get back to. for generations upon generations upon generations upon generations, right? Do you know where from Africa your family's from?
So my family is from the Caribbean.
Okay.
Mainly from
But check it though. So
Yeah.
boom, that still doesn't answer my question, because you know that if you're from the Caribbean, y'all start off in Africa and got dropped off in the Caribbean, right? So the only reason, not the only reason, I'm not going to say that. Predominantly, if we're working through this conversation of the open boat, you're in the Caribbean because that boat stopped in the Caribbean, right? But before it got to the Caribbean, it snatched your ancestors up from Africa, but you don't know that, right? That's that third metamorphosis of the abyss, which you don't know, what's been stolen from you because of this experience. Your last name probably wasn't Usher. But you don't know what that last name is because of that experience, right? And that's that third metamorphosis of the abyss. So the abyss fundamentally is the unknown, but it presents itself in a myriad of ways. Three in particular: the boat that you are forced into, the ocean that you're thrown into or you voluntarily jump into, or all that's been left behind. That's what the metamorphosis of the abyss are. Does that answer your question? Let's get one more and we'll call it a day. Anyone else? Any last question, comments, concerns, thoughts? Talk about how you're feeling. Fabian,
I have a comment.
Go ahead.
I don't know if you, sorry. I'm not too sure if you went over this part of the reading. You may be repetitive, but I'm still gonna show you what the reading is. It's at around page 9, all the way at the bottom. It's this little part that says, "We know ourselves as part and as crowd. In an unknown that does not terrify, we cry our cry of poetry. Our boats are open and we sell them for everyone." Any insight on that?
Yeah, so check it out, right? Think about the transformation that takes place. We know ourselves as part and as crowd, right? So as I mentioned, people are being taken from various parts of Africa, right? So might have been kidnapped from Ghana, Eric's kidnapped from Nigeria, right? So we know ourselves as these parts, but then we also know ourselves as a crowd, right? As a collective. Because what is the three metamorphoses of the abyss do? It produces this new person, these new people who we call Black folks, right? So that gives us that crowd in an unknown, right? The abyss. It's all about the unknown, but we're not afraid of the abyss, right? We don't know what's going on, but we're not terrified, right? We cry, and think about how he starts the poem, the confrontation between the cries of orality and the ledgers, right? So we cry to institute our humanity. We cry our poetry. This is how we situate our humanness, is through our cries of poetry, right? And think about how he talks about the belly of the boat that swallows up, right? It swallows you up, it participates you. But he says, nah, our boats are open, right? Our boats ain't swallowing nobody, they're open. And we sell them for everyone. Because who did the transatlantic enslavement enterprise benefit? Who was the benefactor of the transatlantic enslavement enterprise? Where did that money go? Who?
Plantation owners, slaveholders,
Perfect, right?
the people in charge of the ships.
White folks, right? Let's call it what it is. White folks. They benefited from the enslavement enterprise. But he says, nah, our boats, they sell for everyone. Because if it's about relation, right? It's about how we're coming together. And relation is not just about one group getting all the spoils. It's about everybody eating, right? Everybody come to the table and eat. That's why we sell our boats for everyone. Does that make sense? All right.
Yeah.
Any other last minute questions, comments, or concerns? So for Wednesday's reading, read the second part of Glissant, which is the errantry and exile. We'll discuss that, and then we'll go into after Wednesday, next Monday, a week from today, we'll start our midterm review. Okay, so I'll post a study guide for you all, and then we'll spend next Monday and next Wednesday going over that study guide. Next Thursday, I'll assign your midterm, and then you'll have to get that back to me by the following Monday. So just kind of give you some dates, right? Be a little bit more accurate. So October 9th and October 11th, that will be our midterm review. So we'll spend all of next week, Monday, going over your study guides, answering any questions you have about your study guides. We'll spend Monday and Wednesday doing that. The 12th, that following Thursday, the 12th, I will post your midterms to Canvas. It will be like 5 essay questions. You'll only have to answer 3 of the 5 essay questions, okay? That will be due by October 16th, which is that from the 12th, that following Monday. So you have what? 3 days to do the midterm. So the way I kind of explain to students, just do 1 question a day, right? If you have 5 questions, you have to do 3 of the 5. So what? Friday, you do question 1, Saturday, you do question 2, Sunday, you do question 3, and then you're done with your midterm, right? But we'll discuss this in more greater detail as the week goes on. I just kind of want to prep you for what's coming as it pertains to your midterm. Also, with your midterm, you will submit your journals for the first half of the semester, so make sure that you are on top of those. I will also post what readings will be due for the journals and what to expect from that. But that will be turned in with the midterm on the 16th of October. Are there any questions, comments, or concerns about that?
So for the midterm, as you said, so it's like 5 essay questions and you have to answer 3 of them. By essay questions, you mean like each of the questions have to be answered in like a paragraph or 2 or an essay?
Yes. I don't really trip about page length or length of the response, right? But
Okay, I can tell.
you just want to make sure you're answering the question completely, right? And for example, the question might say, how old are African people? Name for me 1 significant African individual prior to European contact and their contributions. And then state why this information is important in the world of academia, right? So if you listen to what I said, it's 1 question, but within that 1 question, there's 3 separate questions. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you want to make sure you're answering all of those sub-questions, because if you tell me how old African people are, and then you name an African individual and their contributions, but you don't state why this is important for the academy, then you miss some points, right? So that's why I say I'm not worried about how long it is, but I want to make sure that you answer your question completely. Good question. And then also make sure that there are 3 separate essays. It shouldn't be just like 1 5-page essay answering all 3 questions. Separate them so I can know which one you're dealing with. But again, we'll spend all week making you prepared, making sure that you're comfortable, and then answering all the questions you have about the midterm. So you'll feel good about it before it's distributed. I just kind of want to put that on your radar as we're getting closer to those times. Anyone else? Any other questions, comments, or concerns?